In this series, and exclusive to this channel, you'll hear a word-for-word account of what the jury were told after hearing 9 months of evidence during Lucy Letby's original trial. Now, with so much harmful misinformation currently being spread online and in mainstream publications surrounding this case, this series seeks to provide for the first time exactly what transpired in court. That means no ill-informed commentary or any bias, simply the evidence as presented during the trial itself. This video has been made possible by the purchasing of court-approved transcripts, further details of which can be found in the video description box below. What you'll hear next is a detailed summary of the prosecution's case against Lucy Letby. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. I'm going to move on to the case of Child H, please. Sometimes starting at the end rather than the beginning can be illuminating. I'm going to do that with Child H, and I'm going to start at tile 499, please. It's not quite the end, but it's almost the end. This is a discharge written by Dr. Matthew Neame to Arrow Park on September 27th. If we scroll down, please, there we see, quote, diagnosis pneumothorax, ventilated for 2 days. CPAP for 2 days. Initiated on CPAP after birth due to grunting and poor capillary gases. We see the mention of the chest drains, the further deterioration on September 25th associated with reacclimation of the left-sided pneumothorax, the needle thoracentesis, the reinsertion of another drain, the non-pigtail drain, that's Dr. J-Ram's drain, the further deterioration on the 26th at 2:15. The third pigtail drain. Then further down, please, it says, Child H currently ventilated. Chest X-ray shows well-expanded lungs with no pneumothorax. And then further down we have, thank you for accepting this 34-week gestation baby who has had 2 significant episodes of bradycardia requiring resuscitation with adrenaline and CPR in the last 24 hours with no clear precipitating factors. It also reads, Child H's course has been complicated by the development of RDS and pneumothoraces, as outlined above, but the acute episodes with desaturations and bradycardias do not seem to be directly related to the respiratory problems. So that, was the view when Child H left, and it is a familiar refrain in this case, isn't it? As with others who were removed from the orbit of Lucy Letby, once Child H left the hospital, her management quickly de-intensified. The chest drains and the ET tubes were removed. She did well. Her heart was normal, as was her blood pressure. And as Child H's mum and dad said in a statement, she was like a completely different baby at Arrow Park. Child H was in the neonatal unit with both Child G and Child I. Child H was a large baby by the standards of this case, 2.33 kilograms, and she was not particularly premature. She undoubtedly had RDS, respiratory distress syndrome, but that's something which is not unusual and something that in a neonatal unit should not have caused serious problems. Between her birth on September 22nd and her transfer to Arrow Park early on the morning of the 27th, she desaturated several times and had associated bradycardias, and she had 2 cardiac arrests mentioned in that discharge letter. And as the letter says, and as the evidence you heard established, those 2 events were of a very different character to what happened otherwise. A significant period of time in the evidence during the prosecution case involved questioning about the delay in giving Child H surfactant and the staffing levels. But as the cross-examination of Lucy Letby revealed, at least as far as the staffing levels were concerned, they didn't contribute to the collapses of Child H. At the time Child H had her most serious collapses, she was the only child in Nursery 1. At the time, she always had one-to-one nursing care. And incidentally, the delay in giving surfactant had nothing to do with the 2 collapses which required adrenaline. So we say, please don't get distracted by that. Many of the apneas and bradycardias that Child H had were caused by obvious issues. Primarily, it was the accumulation of air in her chest outside her left lung. On some occasions, the tube was blocked, but on 2 occasions, the occasions specified in counts 10 and 11 when she had the most extreme collapses, the tube was not blocked. There was no pressing problem with the pneumothoraces, and the treating medics could hear air going in and out of her lungs. So that proves, doesn't it, that wasn't the problem. The mother of child H's statement was read to you on January 18th. You'll remember that the mother of child H has diabetes and because of blood sugar issues was admitted to Chester. And child H was delivered by C-section, as I said, on September 22nd. Child H was in good condition, but she developed breathing problems and was put onto CPAP. And that night she was put onto a ventilator. Overnight, on the 23rd to the 24th, Lucy Letby was child H's designated nurse. Dr. Ventris told us that child H had been weaned down to CPAP and was in air by 6 a.m. on September 24th. On the day shift of the 24th, Nurse B came on duty and took over child H's care. Child H was deteriorating at handover from Lucy Letby. She had a poor blood gas and desaturated to the 50s and needed bagging, though her heart rate remained at over 100. She then had to be intubated, having previously been on CPAP. As the day shift progressed, it became clear that child H had a pneumothorax, and the first chest drain was inserted at 10 o'clock by Dr. Harkness. So far as the acute problem was concerned, the immediate problem, that was sorted. On the night shift of the 24th into the 25th, by the time it got into the 25th, Lucy Letby on that shift was the designated nurse again. Dr. Ventris was urgently bleeped at 0114. When Dr. Ventris arrived, child H was being neopuffed, and there was then a rapid increase in saturations. But chest movement remained poor, and the capnograph was slow to change, and child H desaturated again at 0125 with poor chest movement. And so Dr. Ventris used a needle to aspirate 70 ml of air from child H's pneumothorax and called for Dr. J-Ram. Dr. J-Ram arrived at 0150 and he put in the second drain. This was the old-fashioned drain, if you remember, not the pigtail drain. Dr. J-Ram was cross-examined about the possibility of chest drains coming into contact with the vagal nerve or heart, presumably as a prelude to a suggestion that must have been the reason for child H's 2 unexplained collapses. And Dr. J-Ram said in no uncertain terms he had never seen either eventuality happen. He made the point that if the drain was in the pleural space, then the lung was between it and the pericardium, which is a sac containing the heart. And the pericardium, in any event, would block the route of the drain to the heart. Dr. J-Ram was asked to look at the radiographs, and he made the point, did Dr. J-Ram, that they're 2-dimensional images, so they can be very misleading. He said that because the drain was at the front of the chest, it wouldn't come into contact with either the heart or the vagal nerve. He also made the point that the internal point of the drain would only move, that's internal to the chest, as the pneumothorax resolved, as the air was evacuated. He said it could not wiggle about, as was being suggested to him. Now, we heard a lot of evidence about this, you'll remember I'm sure. It wasn't until sometime later on the 3rd of February when Professor Arthurs made an appearance and made what we suggest is a very significant contribution to the debate. If we'd had Professor Arthurs' evidence at the time, it may well have reduced the amount of time that we spent on the issue. Professor Arthurs said several things, important things. First, I'm quoting him here. Chest drains aren't known necessarily to cause bradycardia and desaturations. Otherwise, we'd have been seeing it in almost every baby who had a chest drain in. Second, we don't examine where chest drain positions are in detail because they tend not to cause any problems. Their precise position is not really that relevant to a radiologist. Third, he said the interpretation of the position of a chest drain was his field of expertise, not that of a neonatologist or paediatrician. And he said that in his opinion, looking at these images, the chest drains were in the pleural space. In other words, they were where they were supposed to be, and they were not a concern. So that's the evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, the Professor of Radiology from Great Ormond Street told you there isn't an issue with the position of the chest drains as shown in the imaging in this case. You don't have to accept what he says, of course, that's a matter for you, but you don't actually have any evidence that contradicts him, do you? So with that in mind, can we go to the evidence of the two collapses, starting with count 10, the collapse on the 26th of September at 03:22. The timing coming from Lucy Letby's note at tile 241. We can see on this first night shift on which one of these incidents happened, Lucy Letby was Child H's designated nurse and she had Child H to herself in room 1. We say therefore she could pick her moment. The father of Child H, his statement was read to you and it covered the time before Child H collapsed. The father of Child H recounted to you how he and his wife spent time in the neonatal unit from Child H's birth through to Friday the 25th of September. When he got to his description of what happened on the Friday, he said this, and I'm quoting directly from the statement. I'd been there with the mother of Child H's mum, so Child H's mum's mother, on Friday until about midnight. It's the time that's important, until about midnight. And we'd come back to the house. I was awoken by her in the early hours. She'd had a call from the mother of Child H that we needed to go back to the hospital. Remember, the mother of Child H was in hospital as an inpatient. He then said that when he got back to the hospital, quote, I definitely remember Lucy being there. She was doing the chest massaging. When we got into the area, it was explained to us that Child H had had a collapse. Dr. Ravi Jairam came in and put some chest drains in her, but prior to that time I remember she was getting massaged by Lucy, and that she was a very strange colour, very mottled. As Child H was coming back round, I remember the mottling was running out of her skin towards her fingers. And that was when Dr. Gibbs explained that the pressurised air in her lungs had caused a tear. I remember the mottling was running out of her skin towards her fingers. Well, that's an interesting observation by the father of Child H, isn't it, in this case? Particularly when you know what happened with the other children. But a reference to mottling running out of her skin at the time of this profound and serious collapse isn't the only interesting feature of what the father of Child H said. As I said a moment ago, the other important point is that he left at, quote, about midnight. He left at about midnight. If we go to Lucy Letby's nursing note at tile 208, please, ladies and gentlemen, we see this is what she wrote at 04:14. Written for care given from 2000 to present. Emergency equipment checked, fluids calculated. Child H nursed in an incubator. Ventilated with size 3.5 ET tube, 8 centimetres at lips. Ventilator settings gradually increased during shift in line with blood gas and clinical picture. Currently 24/4. 2 chest drains in situ at start of shift, intermittently swinging. Serous fluid accumulating. Then this, 23:30, bradycardia and desaturation requiring neopuff in 100% to recover. 10 ml AI aspirated from chain by registrar ventris. Following poor blood gas and 100% oxygen requirements, consultant Gibbs attended the unit and inserted a third chest drain. All 3 drains swinging and serous fluid present. This shows, ladies and gentlemen, this shift, according to the note, was uneventful for Child H until 23:30. At least that's the time put in the note by Lucy Letby. She times the desaturation in the note as 23:30 and says it had the consequence not only that the neopuff had to be used, but also that Dr. Ventris had to intervene. It says, quote, 10 ml, I think that probably is air. I think that was the evidence. Air aspirated from chest drain by registrar ventris. If we go to Dr. Ventris' notes, which were made at the time, this is tile 210, we see a number of interesting features. First, Dr. Ventris wasn't called at 23:30. She was called at 23:50. You remember what time the father of Child H said he left? Just before midnight. Second, Lucy Letby was telling her friend Dr. Ventris that there had been several episodes of desaturation in the past 2 hours. Where's that come from? Third, the first desaturation reported to Dr. Ventris was, quote, after gas taken, good gas became agitated. If we go to tile 196, Lucy Letby wrote in at 22:10, so before the good gas, a desaturation down to 52%. That doesn't appear at all in the typed nursing notes. Going back to Dr. Ventris' notes, please. Lucy Letby was telling Dr. Ventris that there had been, quote, a desaturation associated with poor chest movement and bradycardia, thick mucus suction from ETT, and then chest movement and SATs improved. 10 ml air aspirated. She also told Dr. Ventris there had been other further episodes with no change in heart rate. There's nothing in the observation charts. There's nothing to suggest there was anything wrong during this period. So the father of child H is there with his daughter. An apparently uneventful night, leaves just before midnight. Dr. Ventris is called at 23:50, just before midnight. We've heard that before, haven't we? Just after the parents leave. Dr. Ventris is given a long litany of problems that have been occurring over the night or over the evening. Where's the evidence in the nursing records that accords with what Lucy Letby was telling Dr. Ventris? Or is this part of Lucy Letby's effort to get other people to record things in their notes that make it look like child H had a problem, but in fact there was no problem? Just harking back to yesterday, child E, getting Belinda Williamson to make those notes at 2200 hours, to which Lucy Letby then added after the event, all to make it look like other people are there when things are going wrong. But in fact it's all coming from Lucy Letby. Child H hadn't had a problem until Lucy Letby caused the problem. Another thing, going back to tile 210 please, because according to a note made by Dr. Ventris, this second chest drain had managed to almost remove itself. It's right at the bottom there, quote, second chest drain advanced back to 4 centimetres as was almost out. Moving ET tubes, moving a chest drain, a very effective way to sabotage the care of these children, isn't it? When you're considering whether or not that chest drain almost came out for an innocent reason, you might want to bear in mind that at 16:21 that afternoon, this is tile 149, Nurse D had made a note that, quote, following a desaturation by child H, the second chest drain noted to be in a different position and holes close to chest wall. Further tegaderm applied and chest drain tubing position altered. This is the second drain. This is Dr. J. Ram's drain. It's the same one that was noted as having come out by Dr. Ventris, but it was securely fixed at that point. Do you remember what Lucy Letby said about reading other people's notes? She made it her business to read back to get context. So she sees a problem in the afternoon and copies it in the evening. We know that's right because of the discrepancy between the father of child H's statement, which is agreed evidence, and the contents of what Lucy Letby is telling the doctor. And the fact that what Lucy Letby was telling the doctor, she hadn't noted herself on the charts. There can be, we suggest, no other possible. This is just looking at this one event in isolation. Ignore everything else in the case. What other conceivable explanation is there? Now, as the issues mounted for child H, Dr. Gibbs was called in by Dr. Ventris. He came to review child H. He inserted the third drain at 02:15 to help child H saturate properly, and it had the desired effect, and the position was confirmed by an X-ray at 02:30. Dr. Gibbs then left, but he was called back at 03:30 when child H desaturated even more severely. This is the event we allege in count 10. When Dr. Gibbs returned at 03:36, he saw child H being given CPR and adrenaline. The position of the ET tube wasn't the issue because it was being used to ventilate child H. And when compressions were stopped, no pulse could be felt. Child H was in a very, very poor shape. But after 3 doses of adrenaline, her spontaneous pulse returned. She'd been in arrest for 22 minutes. 22 minutes. And this is the point at which child H's dad said, I remember the mottling was running out of her skin towards her fingers. Dr. Gibbs took us through all the possibilities that might have caused such an extreme collapse, and he excluded them all. In cross-examination, it was suggested to him that, quote, cumulative stress could have been the reason for child H's near-death experience. He rejected that suggestion, and there is no evidence to support it as a proposition. Dr. Gibbs was asked about whether it could have been the drains being in contact with the heart which caused the collapse. He said not. And when pressed about what he'd been advised by Dr. Rafa Arrow Park, he said it was a reference to the possibility of the drain touching the heart causing bradycardia, not the collapses. You'll remember the evidence of Dr. Arthur's, which we suggest puts this to bed in any case. And Dr. Gibbs also made the point that when the third chest drain was removed, child H continued to have problems, and so that was clearly not what was causing the problems. You may think, and we suggest that you conclude, that that must be right. The second collapse, which is count 11, Shelley Tomlins, who you remember is now in Australia, was the designated nurse for child H. Dr. Soni removed a chest drain from child H, and we can see that recorded in the medical notes at tile 393. A crash call went out at 20:49, tile 396. And on this occasion, the doctor called to rescue child H was Dr. Neem. He gave evidence on January 23rd. When he arrived, he found Lucy Letby doing the breathing support. He didn't recall anyone else being there at the time, and he said that ordinarily it would be the designated nurse who briefed him on what happened. And he confirmed that he told the police that he had assumed from all the circumstances that Lucy Letby was the designated nurse. She wasn't, of course, but the situation that presented itself to Dr. Neem gave him the clear impression that she was. And you know why? Because as normal, we suggest she elbowed one of her colleagues out of the way. He remembered, did Dr. Neem, seeing the ET tube blocked with secretions, and so this was an innocent cause for the desaturation. But the fact that Lucy Letby was the person who was hands-on, we suggest, informs you about what was to happen later in the shift. She was taking a very keen interest in child H, having failed to kill her the night before. The fact that Shelley Tomlins was the designated nurse for child H hadn't prevented Lucy Letby getting involved, despite the fact that child H was being ventilated. We see further evidence of this from the text messages that were passing between Lucy Letby and Nurse A. Can we go to tile 406, please? So this is an hour and a half or so into the shift. Quote, "I've been helping Shelley, so Lee's still involved, but haven't got the responsibility." Plausible deniability again, we say. This supports Dr. Neem, doesn't it? He hadn't read these text messages. He got the impression that Lucy Letby was the designated nurse. This is why I say she's elbowing out her colleagues to get involved with children she has an interest in. We know that Lucy Letby was supposed to be in nursery 2. We know from other evidence that she always wanted to be in nursery 1. And that text to Nurse A, we suggest, confirms that she wanted to be in nursery 1. It also shows her state of mind at the time, doesn't it? Like her state of mind on the night she killed child C. She saw this, as revealed by that text message, as an opportunity to sabotage child H without being connected to what she had done. If we go to tiles 414 and 415, please, there she was, co-signing for medication for child H at 22:12, administering it to child H at 416 and 417, that's 22:13. At 00:55, child H had a profound desaturation to 40%, despite equal bilateral air entry and positive capnography. ET suctioned yielded nil secretions, and you'll find that in Shelley Tomlin's note at tile 236. Equal bilateral air entry, positive capnography. It's a signature, isn't it? I keep saying it in different cases because there are so many similarities. Air going in, carbon dioxide coming out, another child desaturating to life-threatening levels for no apparent reason. It wasn't a pneumothorax that was the problem, was it? Because air entry both sides. If the pneumothorax was preventing the air going in, you wouldn't get air entry on both sides. And Shelley Tomlins confirmed in evidence that she had checked the ET tube on this occasion and there was no blockage. The medical staff were all bleeped. Dr. Neem reintubated child H, CPR was started, adrenaline administered, and mercifully, child H was revived. An X-ray was taken just after this at tile 451, which confirms that there wasn't an issue with the pneumothorax. Again, the circumstances immediately prior to this collapse were dealt with in the witness statement of child H's father. He said this, referring to his daughter. She was okay during the Saturday day, and then quite late on, I remember going to the parents' bedroom on the ward to get some sleep. It was only shortly afterwards we got a knock on the door to say that she had deteriorated and needed medical attention, and for us to go and be with her at her bedside. The timing of this collapse says it all, doesn't it? The parents, who now no doubt were besotted with their newly arrived daughter paying her close attention, disappeared, and the opportunity presented itself to Lucy Letby to sabotage yet another child. Just like child M, child O, and child P. The departure of the parents is a signal for Lucy Letby to seek to kill. There's another list when the nurses go, isn't there? We've dealt with that many times. And I'll wrap all these up at the end for you and give you the final lists. Dr. Neame attended again. Again, his memory was that it was Lucy Letby who briefed him as to what had happened. As he said, quote, "I remember a sense of being more concerned on this occasion because it wasn't completely clear why she had collapsed. Air moving in, air moving out, child H's chest rising and falling, but her heart rate and saturations were dangerously low. She was reintubated, the problem persisted, and therefore CPR and adrenaline were required. Fortunately, mercifully, again child H recovered. There was a further desaturation at 3:30 when child H required neopuffing. No cause was identified on that occasion, although air entry or lack of air entry was excluded because Shelley Tomlins confirmed to you that there was good air entry on both sides. At 5:25, child H was handed over to the Arrow Park transport team with the letter I showed you at the beginning. And you know that she quickly recovered once she left Chester. Expert evidence was called on January 24th. I've already dealt with Professor Arthur's short but important contribution, which was a bit later. Dr. Evans, what he said can be summarised very shortly. In his opinion, the pneumothoraces were not the cause of the 2 cardiac arrests. He said that if that was the insertion of the chest drains that caused the arrests, then that would have happened when the drains were put in. He addressed the possibility that perhaps infection had a part to play. He said no for 3 reasons. First, the pattern of decline was not what one sees in cases of infection. Child H in this case had suffered rapid and catastrophic collapses, which is not what one sees with infection. Second, she was on antibiotics, and once she got to Arrow Park, her lumbar puncture proves that she didn't have an infection. Third, if the collapses were due to infection, there would have been no need to use adrenaline and atropine to revive her. Dr. Evans was at a loss to explain what it was, but told you this was not a collapse from natural causes. Dr. Bowen told us that the cause of child H's pneumothoraces was the fact that she had RDS. She had received surfactant relatively late. Dr. Bowen said that the reason for the delay was that an X-ray was needed to confirm the position of the ET tube before surfactant was administered. And it's well known in the medical profession that if you put surfactant down a tube in the wrong place, that can cause significant complications. Having said that, Dr. Bowen was still of the view that things were delayed too long with surfactant. Dr. Bowen said that the difference between the 2 important collapses that we allege are markers of Lucy Letby's attempt to kill child H and what had gone before was that there was a profound desaturation in conjunction with good air entry in and out of the lungs and good chest movement. The fact that the medics could hear air going in and out meant that there was no significant pneumothorax at that time and that the ET tube was not blocked. Child H then went into cardiac arrest. It took a long time to get her back, and Dr. Bowen said this: "I can find no obvious clinical or mechanical cause to account for this collapse, or to account for why child H did not recover as she had done with what was routine intervention." Dr. Bowen also dealt with the issue of movement of the drains. She made the point that following the refixing of Dr. J-Ram's drain by Dr. Gibbs at 16:21 on the 25th, well before the X-ray, it didn't move and was not near to the heart and therefore cannot have been responsible for either collapse. She added that in any event, she had never known a chest drain to cause this sort of problem on 2 occasions, and she rejected out of hand the suggestion that stress was cumulative and that in any event it could cause a cardiac arrest. There was quite a lot of questioning about the position of the chest drain and whether or not it could have caused issues with the vagal nerve or the heart. And as I said, unfortunately that was before we had the benefit of Professor Arthur's opinion. So just wrapping up our position, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Arthur saw no problem with the position of the drains. We suggest you can dismiss that as an idea, the idea that any of them were in a position that would have caused 2 almost fatal collapses. Second, Even if a chest drain was in a position to interfere with the heart or the vagal nerve, the idea that that just happened to coincide with the presence of Lucy Letby and didn't manifest itself at any other time is so unlikely that it can be discounted. Third, there was no disease or mechanically related reason for child H to suffer such extreme collapses, when on both occasions air was going in and out of her lungs. This was undoubtedly a case of sabotage that bears striking similarities to other cases you have heard about. Fourth, the fact that both collapses occurred just after child H's parents had left is another striking coincidence by comparison of each collapse to the other, and by comparison with other cases. And we suggest it is a signature of Lucy Letby at work. And the idea that there could be some innocent reason causing the collapse just at that moment can be dismissed as fanciful. What about what was seen by child H's dad? Just because the medics didn't see it doesn't mean you can't take it into account. It's an astonishing coincidence, isn't it?